Good morning. My name is Emma Schwartz, and I am the CEO of Paso-Juarez and president of the MCA Foundation. It is my honor to welcome you to Paso-Juarez's third annual Medical Device Summit. Paso-Juarez is a young organization with an ambitious goal of representing our region's mature and sophisticated medical device manufacturing industry. A little over 3 years ago, we hosted our very first industry summit at the DoubleTree Hotel in downtown El Paso, with nearly 200 of you in attendance. It was at that first summit that we realized that an organization such as Paso-Juarez was wanted and needed. A few months later, we launched Paso-Juarez, a nonprofit organization in El Paso in partnership with the Cluster Biomedical de Juárez in Ciudad Juárez. During our short existence, we've hosted hundreds of meetings, created strategies and ecosystem studies, presented at national and international events, and grown to over 40 members, with countless additional partners and networks throughout the manufacturing sectors in our region and beyond. We are very proud of how far we've come, and we are excited about our future plans. Over the next 10 months, we've seen firsthand how important it is to have a hub for industry news and updates. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted our region's strength, resilience, and capabilities for providing life-saving medical devices and equipment. So before we begin our first program today, I'd like to take this time to say thank you. Thank you to everyone working in this industry. You are all heroes. The work you do and have been doing in response to this pandemic has saved the lives of frontline healthcare providers and essential workers, and has allowed us to continue working. Thank you all for leading us through these challenging times by creating and producing solutions to fight this pandemic. Thank you also for the work you do day in and day out to address healthcare emergencies, diseases, and chronic conditions. Your dedication to quality and safety saves lives and makes our communities healthier and stronger. Now on to today's event. Over the next 2 days, you will hear presentations from leading experts who will discuss topics ranging from trade and regulatory policy to supply chain and workforce development. The goal is to address industry challenges and provide key insights to help you prepare for the future. I encourage you to register for as many of the remaining sessions as possible. Invite your networks and colleagues to attend, and please do not forget to spend some time visiting our virtual trade show. There, you will meet with medical device manufacturers and suppliers who can enhance your business operations and partnerships. The event platform will allow you to message the exhibitors directly in real time, as well as schedule B2B meetings over the next 2 days. Of course, this summit would not be possible without the support of all of our members, and in particular, our title sponsors, RexMed Healthcare and Ingenio RX. We'd also like to thank the City of El Paso for their support and for allowing us to participate in the Economic Response CARES Act funding programs. Please visit us on social media or on our website for more information about our programs and on how to support BIOEPJ. You can see us at www.bioelpasojuarez.org. Now, just a few housekeeping items and reminders before we get started. A recording of today's session will be posted following the event on the on-demand section of the platform. And we will also have time for Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation, where you'll be able to write down your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. However, the chat function will be disabled during the presentation. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker this morning to discuss manufacturing on the border, economic and industry trends, Dr. Roberto Coronado. Roberto is Senior Vice President in Charge and Senior Economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, El Paso Branch, where he oversees law enforcement functions and economic education programs all across the offices of the 11th Federal Reserve District. He also has oversight for the El Paso Branch, the bank's economic research and outreach functions in West Texas and Southern New Mexico, and recruits branch board members. Roberto is also a senior economist and a member of the regional group of the bank's research department. In that capacity, he provides regional input into the Dallas Fed's monetary policy process and is responsible for monitoring and tracking the economic activity and business activity in West Texas and Southern New Mexico. His research focuses on issues pertaining to the Mexican economy, U.S. Mexico economic integration, and border issues. Dr. Coronado has written several articles for various Federal Reserve publications and academic journals, both in the U.S. and Mexico. He serves as director for the Texas Lyceum and as a board member for Texas 2036, a collaborative for academic excellence, the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and Workforce Solutions Board-of-Plex. He obtained his PhD in economics from the University of Houston and holds a BA in accounting and economics and an MS in economics from the University of Texas at El Paso. Dr. Coronado, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Emma, and thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the opportunity to come and share our views on the economy. And let me see if I can share my screen here and get us started. So again, Emma, thanks for the opportunity and for the collaboration, and quite frankly, thanks for your leadership. You and your team, you know, for the last number of years, you've spent quite a bit of energy and effort trying to build a biomedical cluster in the Paso Del Norte region. And I'll share a few statistics and a few data points in the next 20-25 minutes. And you'll be able to see that, you know, your dividends and your efforts and the efforts of everyone in this call are paying dividends, because this is a sector that's been thriving and has propelled a lot of economic growth locally in Ciudad Juárez, Las Cruces, El Paso. And so I think we're in a very, very good point in that journey. And then also I would like to acknowledge a couple of my colleagues, Keaton Hines and Michelle Webano, who are the masterminds behind our participation today and the partnership that we build with you and the MCA and everyone on this call. So I appreciate Keaton and Michelle's support in getting us to this point. The usual disclaimer applies when you have a Fed economist, that everything that I'm about to say only reflects my personal opinions, and they don't reflect the opinions of the Dallas Fed or the Federal Reserve System. There is an additional disclaimer that I would like to share with the group today, is that the Federal Open Market Committee is meeting today and tomorrow, and right now we are in the FOMC blackout period. And so unfortunately, during the Q&A and during my remarks, I'm not at liberty to discuss monetary policy or macroeconomic issues in the U.S. So I hope you understand that. But the conversation today is mostly about manufacturing and border region, and I think we can have a rich conversation on that front. So this is the roadmap, and quite frankly, we hope that this is going to set the stage for the conversations you will have throughout today and throughout tomorrow. So hopefully you'll find this information valuable. I'll begin by describing a little bit of what we see on the U.S. Mexico economies, with a particular emphasis, of course, on the manufacturing landscape, which I believe has its most relevant sector within both the U.S. and Mexico that for this group and for today's and tomorrow's discussions. Then I'll shift gears into talk about the medical device manufacturing globally, nationally, and then try to bring it regionally, and then briefly go through an economic update on both Ciudad Juárez and El Paso and tell you what we see out there in the economy, and then, of course, conclude with a few remarks at the end. So let me begin with the U.S.-Mexico economic overview. Clearly, as you alluded at the beginning, Emma, COVID-19 has brought a number of different challenges around the world for the U.S., for Mexico. At the end of the day, and then the first and foremost, this is a public health crisis that we're facing and that we're dealing with, and we've been dealing with it since March of this year. And of course, we fully understand and realize, and we're very sympathetic that there's a number of individuals in this call, in our communities, that have faced significant challenges when it comes to their health. But the other part too is that public health crisis has translated into a substantial economic challenges, again, nationally, regional, and locally here. And so the coronavirus disruptions are significant, have been significant, continue to be significant. And when you talk to any economist, their near-term outlook, it's pretty much contingent on the virus, the spread of the virus, hospitalization rates, death rates, positivity, rates. So the virus is driving not only the public health aspect of the situation, but also the economy. We've seen at the national level surge in cases for the past number of weeks, And that, as a result, has slowed things down. And I'll walk you through a few statistics in just a moment. But the short of it is that the economy continues to grow, but the pace of growth has slowed down because in response to the surge in cases. The US economy is a very open economy, and we depend heavily on the global conditions. We are a big exporting nation of both services and goods. And so right now, because the global economy is weak, we've seen weak global demand, and that has put some pressure down into our economic activity. We also have seen some weakening of the dollar. And if you look at the bottom of the slide, the opposite, the peso has strengthened. And that has implications for cross-border manufacturing, the value of currencies. And so when you think about the US, the GDP growth in the third quarter was substantial. After a substantial contraction that we observed in the second quarter, the labor market continues to heal, but the healing process has slowed down. When you look into consumption numbers, whether it's retail sales or other indicators, they continue to post positive growth rates into October and November, but again, at a lower rate than what we saw in the September, July, August timeframe. And that we believe it's because of the resurgence of the virus and people just taking a lot more precautions because of that. On the Mexican side of the economy, we continue to see improvements in the economy, but there's still substantial headwinds, again, particularly driven by the wake of the COVID and the spread of the virus in Mexico. Then we also see, some challenges when it comes to the energy prices and energy activity in Mexico. And of course, some of the discussions around minimum wage and the strengthening of the peso that I think might put a little bit of brakes perhaps into the manufacturing sector here in the near term. So looking into the US and the Mexican economies, when for all of us who live along the US Mexico border, this is, I think, a pretty vivid story of our economic lives. Before NAFTA, before the mid-90s, both the US and the Mexican economies were integrated, but not to the extent that we've seen since the enactment of NAFTA. This is industrial production activity in both the US and Mexico, and you see after NAFTA, basically a lockstep fashion most. If one economy grows, the other grows as well, and vice versa. Of course, right now we're in the US, Mexico, Canada agreement, and I would expect that integration to continue, perhaps even accelerate going forward as there are additional elements in the USMCA that were not present back in NAFTA. So I would expect integration between both the US and Mexican economies, and for that matter, with our Canadian partners, to continue to grow in the years to come. Looking a little bit more into the manufacturing sectors, both in the US and Mexico, in here what we're showing is industrial production for both the US and Mexico since 2010. And you can see here the substantial contraction in the wake of COVID. And then a nice recovery, but we're still not back to pre-COVID levels. Nice recovery, but still not there. A number or indicator that we track closely is the Institute for Supply Management. And if you were to look at the last reading for the US, you would see that we are in expansionary territory. But when you looked into the narrative that the participants that comply or that fulfill the survey, you will see that companies and suppliers continue. They say they continue to operate in reconfigured factories, absenteeism, short-term shutdowns to sanitize facilities, and difficulty in recruiting and returning workers are causing them to pose significant challenges. So the manufacturing sector, even though we've seen a recovery, that recovery has been extremely challenging because of the ongoing situation when it comes with COVID. And based on the anecdotal information we've gathered from our contacts in Mexico, in Ciudad Juárez, I think they continue to basically be agile and pivot and redirect resources depending on how the challenges unfold because of the COVID spread. Looking into the manufacturing sector in North America, for the last number of years, we've seen pretty encouraging trends. I would argue that the level of competitiveness that we have in North America has increased, and perhaps increased substantially. And that is because of productivity gains in North America, because lower operating costs, and then also because we know our head-to-head competition, which is Asia. We've seen in China in particular their operating costs, higher wages, and now with COVID, we've seen quite a bit of supply chain disruptions that have forced and have made, executives in the manufacturing sector rethink their approach as to how would they would like to have their optimal footprint globally when it comes to production. And of course, for medical device, this is even more critical. The access to market, the just-in-time inventory is key. And so I would expect those conversations to continue, and I would expect North America, particularly in light of the USMCA, to be well positioned to be a lot more competitive than what we were maybe 5-10 years ago. Another thing that we are tracking is that Mexico has gone for the last number of years through a lot of structural reforms, trying to modernize their economy and make it stronger and more resilient. But we've also seen in some cases that they've changed some of those structural reforms. And so that's something we had to keep track of and see if those will have, what sort of implications would those have for not only Mexico's competitiveness levels, but also North America. So that's something we're tracking closely. When we think about the change of manufacturing, manufacturing, it's a pretty agile and pretty dynamic sector and has always been like that. They got to be, all of you who are in this call, who are in the manufacturing sector, had to be on the cutting edge, very innovative, very nimble and agile to react to what the economic landscape throws at you. And historically, this sector has been growth stronger than the overall economy. Productivity gains have been more substantial, and that's because of a lot of the efforts into technology and automation that we've seen for the last number of decades. The labor force is increasingly more educated, not only in the U.S. but in Mexico as well. And I found, I think you'll find this statistic very telling. So if the trend in the U.S. continues, that we've seen when it comes to the level of skills that manufacturing sector requires, it is expected that within the next 3 years, the U.S. manufacturing workers with college degrees will outnumber those that do not have a college degree. So if within the next 3 to 5 years, let's put it that way, it is likely that the balance will tilt to a college degree. And that's a substantial change in how the manufacturing sector operates and sort of the skill sets that they require and they recruit for them to keep innovative, for them to keep growing, gaining productivity gains. And I don't think Mexico is behind. I don't think Mexico is immune to that. We've seen that sort of trend into higher skill sets, even on the Mexican manufacturing sector. Another part that it's extremely important, it's the intellectual property. Intellectual property is key to manufacturing. Talked about that innovation, that research and design. And quite frankly, when you looked into trade volumes and trade flows between nations, usually the IP, the intellectual property, is understated. It's hard for economists, it's hard for data scientists to quantify it. We know it's there. And another statistic that I found very telling is that it is estimated that roughly about 40 million Americans today work in intellectual property intensive industries. This is in the US. So again, intellectual property is a big element, and I would imagine and I would suspect that with the USMCA in place, it's going to help us solidify the relationship and solidify the way we think about as a North America bloc when it comes to intellectual property. So I think those are exciting developments that will continue to position the North American manufacturing sector in a good spot. So let me shift gears a little bit into the medical device manufacturing. So when we think about this in the US, this is a big sector within the US. We're talking about the market size close to 50 billion in revenue for this year. When you think about the average growth, it's 2.7% and has grown, quite frankly, faster than the overall manufacturing. And this is before COVID. This is before the pandemic. We've seen that trend before that. It is estimated that in the US, there's about 6,500 companies that operate in the medical device sector. Most of them are small. On the Mexican side, Mexico has made substantial inroads into the medical device manufacturing. Mexico today is the largest exporter of medical devices to the U.S. and the 8th largest in the world. So clearly making substantial inroads. It is estimated that Mexico has close to 40,000 workers in this space. And there's 2 states that have made substantial progress and make substantial inroads. It's Baja California Norte and Chihuahua, which is just across from us here in El Paso. Just looking into Ciudad Juárez, our sister city, it's believed that the data says that there are 300 FDA registered devices that are manufactured today in Ciudad Juárez. So again, very strong footprint, not only globally, North America, but regionally as well. Looking into El Paso, Juárez, this is where the rubber meets the road. When you think about the maquiladora business or the offshoring manufacturing in Mexico, in a few years, that's going to be celebrating the 60th anniversary. So these offshoring platforms for manufacturing have been in this community for almost 6 decades now. So there's a long legacy and a long history of, Ciudad Juárez and El Paso playing in this space. When it comes to medical devices, this is a cluster that Emma and her colleagues and a lot of the leadership in our communities have been putting a lot of their emphasis. When you think about healthcare, advanced materials, biomedical device manufacturing, we believe there's about 30 factories in this region playing in that space today, that maybe about 40,000 people are employed in that ecosystem today. And I'll show you some statistics in just a second. That will, accelerate, will emphasize or underscore that sector locally. And then we have a number of different assets. It's not only about manufacturing, but it's the entire ecosystem. We have public and private hospitals, medical schools, military hospitals. So there's an entire ecosystem that really bodes well to cultivate and continue to grow and mature the biomedical sector in the Paso Norte region. Looking more into the local economy. And so what do we see out there? Now, I understand, I apologize for it. This is a busy chart, but this is probably the most telling and perhaps the most relevant chart when we think about the El Paso economy today. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the spread of COVID is driving the economy. So let me walk you through what we have here. So in the gray line, it's the number of confirmed cases in El Paso. And you can see that we saw a spike in the summer, then there was a nice contraction in the August, September timeframe, but then we saw a substantial spike beginning the middle of September all the way through early November. Fortunately, we are trending in the right direction. Cases are still elevated, but nonetheless are trending in the right direction. And the statistics that we've seen in the last few days are very encouraging. So I hope that we continue to be going that trend. The black line is the number of deaths due to COVID. And that's the part that continues to be elevated. And because of the wave that we just went through, and unfortunately, I'm afraid this is going to be the case. We're going to be in elevated numbers here for quite some time. And that's a very unfortunate data point that we are tracking here. Now, when it comes to the economy, I would point the blue line. This is the Mobility and Engagement Index. We've built this for the national economy, state, and every single community in the nation. And this is basically just tracking geolocational devices, your cell phones, and just trying to make an assessment of how active and how are we moving in our communities? Are we going to work? Are we going to the shopping center? Are we going to the grocery store? And so if you think about January through March, 0 is normal. We were living our lives as normal and we were very active in our communities. Then the pandemic hit in mid-March and basically we went shelter at home and that declined to close to minus 90. That's when everyone was at home, all the businesses were shut down and the mobility basically came to a complete halt. After that, we've seen a gradual pickup in mobility and engagement, a plateau for most of the summer. But then as soon as we saw that second wave in the September-November timeframe, we've seen the mobility and engagement decline. And this is telling us that we are not as active in our economy, in our communities. And I would suspect that whenever this blue line comes down, the economy suffers and feels it. And so that's something we're tracking very closely. And of course, the spread of the virus dictates how comfortable we are around doing our lives and going to work and going to the shopping center and the restaurants and what have you. The business cycle, this is the business cycle. This is a more traditional look at the economy. You can see here substantial contraction, a nice recovery, but still no near where we were before pandemic. The labor market continues to heal. October numbers were encouraging, but again, we still have a long way to go before we recover the jobs that we lost due to the pandemic. The bulk of the job losses in Texas, in El Paso, were in the sectors that are the most vulnerable. When you think about leisure and hospitality, when you think about other personal services, those are the sectors, you know, the person-to-person contact sort of jobs are the ones that are struggling the most given the pandemic. Looking at the unemployment rate, we have a roughly 7.5% unemployment rate in El Paso, a little bit higher than Texas. There's a couple of metro areas in our state that have higher unemployment rate. That's Houston and Midland, Odessa. In addition to COVID, they are dealing with lower energy prices and lower energy activity, and that's why they're having a much difficult time there. Something that we're tracking closely is our ability to work from home, and this is what has made, to a great extent, communities and industries resilient. So one of our colleagues, an economist at the Dallas Fed, has done this analysis. And basically, if you look at the top of the chart, you see the US with 39%. So he estimates that roughly 40% of the workforce in the US can effectively work from home. For Texas, he's at 37%. And then he does the dissection of the data by gender, by college, by educational attainment, by income levels, by ethnicity, and by metro. If you look at the bottom, this is different Texas metros, and there you see El Paso with 31%. And in here, it tells you that we have a lower disproportional number of individuals that can work effectively from home. So as we do the shelter at place, at home, the shutting down the economy has a higher impact for us in El Paso than other communities because we are not as prone to be able to work from home in our community. Looking into more real-time frequency data points, in here we talked about daily consumer spending. This is basically tracking debit card and credit card transactions. And you can see that for El Paso, we've saw a substantial decline in the activity as far as consumer spending in the wake of the spike in cases. We've seen a recovery, but we're still down close to 30% to where we were before the pandemic. Texas is about 13% lower. So clearly we have been hit disproportionately larger in El Paso vis-a-vis Texas. Looking into small businesses, today we believe, based on this data, that about 30% of the small businesses have their doors closed. And we've been there for quite some time. And so that tells you that the longer we stay here, the more challenging it would be for those small businesses to come back and be able to open their doors once we are on the other side of the pandemic. So this is something we're tracking very closely because we know that El Paso, to a great extent, is a small business economy. It's an economy that is driven by small businesses. An area that I think for most of the folks in this call, in the conference today and tomorrow, would come and not surprise is that, you know, what happens in the Mexican manufacturing platforms in Ciudad Juárez in the state of Chihuahua matters for El Paso big time. And so we've done a lot of research trying to estimate and quantify what sort of impact does manufacturing in northern Mexico have for communities like El Paso, but we do the same thing for Nogales, for Laredo, for McAllen, you name it. And basically, our research indicates that if Ciudad Juárez grows by 10% in maquila or manufacturing activity production, we in El Paso grow our labor market by 3%, roughly speaking. Of course, there are specific sectors that benefit the most: trade, transportation, for example, financial insurance and real estate services, business services benefit tremendously. But the bottom line is that if we believe, based on our research, that roughly 1 in every 4 jobs created, this is the delta, 1 in every 4 jobs created in El Paso for the last couple of decades or so could be attributed to the manufacturing platforms in Mexico. And the bulk of those jobs are on the service side of the economy, which is a pretty encouraging trend because service side sectors traditionally pay higher wages and bring higher standards of living than other jobs. So this is an encouraging trend that we've seen in El Paso, and we've seen in other border communities for that matter. So this is a dynamic chart, and I'm going to play it here a couple of times. And basically what we have here, this is the clusters that we have in El Paso. There are different sectors. You see the labels around different bubbles. On the vertical axis, you have the location quotient. The higher a bubble is, the more concentration we have vis-a-vis the national economy. And on the horizontal axis, you have employment share. Basically, the farther you are to the right, the bigger and the more important that sector is. All of the bubbles are static for 2019, with the exception of, and let me see if I can play it again, with the exception of health. And in here, this is healthcare. Now, what do I have? What do we have in this bubble? Let me tell you what's in there. So in there, you have medical and surgical hospitals, mental health care center, emergency medical center, labs, diagnostic imaging, nursing, but then you also have a little bit of the biomedical device manufacturing. Today, healthcare is the largest sector in El Paso, has grown the most over the last 10 years and employs roughly about 43,000 people in El Paso. And this is not, I would like to say, this is not by accident, this is by design. There's a lot of effort and strategy and economic development efforts behind this. Emma, the MCA, the medical school, and there's a collective effort in our communities to try to grow and develop this sector. And I think we are in the early stages of seeing the dividends from those efforts. And I'll show you a similar chart for Juárez in just a second. So let me move to Ciudad Juárez. Like us in El Paso, our colleagues and our friends in the sister city in Ciudad Juárez continue to struggle with COVID. We believe, based on the trends and the statistics that we track, that things have improved somewhat in the last couple of weeks, but they continue to be elevated. They went through a similar surge that we went in the October-November timeframe, which stressed their healthcare system and came with a substantial toll for our friends and family in Ciudad Juárez. This is this is employment in Ciudad Juárez, formal employment. You see a dip because of COVID, but a nice recovery. 2/3 of Ciudad Juárez economy is in the manufacturing sector. It's the maquiladora, the offshoring activity that we see there. And if you looked, and most people in this call are aware, is the who's who in global manufacturing platforms. The largest corporations have a footprint in our communities here, particularly in Ciudad Juárez. This is the chart that I was telling you. And here we have everything static to 2018, I believe, with the exception of two bubbles, biomedical and advanced materials. So let me tell you what do we have in advanced materials. In there you have medical manufacturing. Let me see if I can play it again. You would have surgical and medical instrument manufacturing, testing labs, R&D. In the biomedical, you would have medical equipment, diagnostic imaging equipment, medical labs, pharmaceutical manufacturing. And so this is, both of these, you can see advanced materials is the largest sector in Ciudad Juárez today. And biomedical is growing at a faster clip as well. So again, I would say this is not by accident, this is by design. It's a concerted effort in our communities to try to grow and stimulate the activity in this cluster. And I believe we begin to see that in the data, and it's paying dividends. When you think about the advanced materials in Ciudad Juárez, they hire roughly about 165,000 people. And the biomedical, it's about 34,000 people in Ciudad Juárez. But there's also a bigger section, there's other manufacturing activity taking place in Ciudad Juárez. The auto sector is extremely important, has always been household electronics, electronic devices. So there's a number of other manufacturing platforms in Ciudad Juárez, not only the biomedicals, but biomedical by far has been has shown the strongest growth. And I would say, that the USMCA, the implementation, the ratification of the USMCA has removed a lot of uncertainty that has been there for quite some time as the three nations went through the negotiation of the USMCA. So the final ratification was a sense of relief, so to speak, for everyone who plays in this space. So let me just give you a couple of concluding remarks, and I'll turn it back to you, Emma, for if there's some Q&A from the audience. The manufacturing sector in North America, I believe, has a bright future, despite the current challenges we're facing because of the economic crisis and because of the pandemic. The USMCA is likely going to set a solid foundation for us to continue to grow. Productivity has has been growing at a solid pace. I would say, healthcare and the biomedical device manufacturing cluster in our region continues to grow, and it's likely to continue to go in that direction. But at the end of the day, the biggest unknown, it's COVID, the spread. When are we going to have therapeutics, the vaccine? I think there's very encouraging news that we've seen in the last few days. So to the extent we continue to have those mitigating factors to put COVID under control, that's the only thing that will help us stimulate the economy on a solid footing going forward. So let me stop here. I would encourage you to visit our website, the Dallas Fed website. There's a number of resources. There's a specific section when it comes to COVID that I would encourage you to visit and check out those resources. Hopefully you'll find them useful. So let me stop sharing my screen, Emma, and turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Roberto. That is some pretty fascinating and impressive information that you shared with us about our region, with a lot of encouraging news and information, but also I see a lot of challenges ahead for us. One of the benefits that we feel, the silver linings of the pandemic, is really this disruption in the supply chain and the potential for us to receive some of that supply chain benefit in our region. What do you hear about that chatter? And can you comment a little bit on the fact that some of the fear is that we have short-term memories. And so maybe for a couple of years post-pandemic, we will consider that, but eventually a low-cost supply chain will win and drive things out again.
Yeah. So, no doubt. I mean, even before the pandemic, even before the renegotiation of NAFTA, now the USMCA, we had seen an ongoing trend of reshoring, right? Bringing some of the manufacturing back from Asia, particularly China, back into North America. And we saw that trend. Then we began on the negotiation table as far as the USMCA. And I think that brought some uncertainty. And then, so now that that's behind us, I think that uncertainty has been removed and that trend has continued. And of course, now the pandemic, my sense is that probably the pandemic has accelerated some of those trends that we had seen for a number of years. I think it's still too early to tell exactly how substantial that reshoring and that disruption is going to play out. Based on the anecdotal evidence that we're hearing from our contacts, both in the US and in Mexico, I think we see all the ingredients in there. And I would imagine in due time, we're going to be seeing those operations perhaps moving back to North America in the near term. But it's still too early to tell you a specific number and tell you this is how many jobs or this is how much production has been brought back into North America. I can tell, based on what we're hearing, it's happening. I think COVID perhaps just accelerate that trend. And you're right, that's something that we'll have to remember because we oftentimes have, to your point, short memories that we only see the next 2 or 3 months. And we often don't look back and say, where have we been for the past 5, 7 years? And we've been in that trend, a lot of manufacturing coming back into North America.
Thank you, Roberto. I want to remind everybody that you can ask questions through the Q&A, so please feel free to send those. But Roberto, I have another question. It's a little related and a little unrelated, but we're seeing this pretty interesting trend in Texas of some major corporations making big moves here, including Hewlett-Packard, Oracle, and Tesla. Although those are two more the Austin and Houston areas, how do you think those could impact El Paso, or how can El Paso have a play to be a beneficiary of those moves?
So yes, we've seen for the last number of years, and of course in the last few weeks, you've seen a lot of press releases and a lot of press conferences making those announcements. But even since the recovery after the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, we've seen migration of people and companies, domestic, this is within the US, coming into Texas in big numbers. And so Texas has been a very strong magnet of talent and companies. I would expect that to continue going forward. And there's a number of different reasons as to why that is happening. And I think, even though some of those companies perhaps may not be headquartering or locating here in El Paso, I think there's opportunities for the business community in El Paso to perhaps take advantage of those. And so, yes, absolutely. For Texas, this is a great success story. And we've seen Texas outpace the national economy for decades, but the last decade we outpaced the US by a wide margin, and to a great extent is because of this migration of capital and people into our state.
It is an interesting period of change and opportunity, most certainly. You and I always are concerned with workforce. You mentioned workforces. It's such an important area of our economy. And I think a disturbing trend that we're seeing is that usually during recessions, we see higher enrollments in our institutions of higher education because people might be unemployed, so they take advantage of that time to gain in their skills and training. We're not seeing that trend right now, I believe, out of financial fear and fear of mobility and other things. Can you make some comments around that? And, as we're trying to get more into a higher tech industry, how that could negatively impact us? Or is that more of a national, global trend where we aren't going to be negatively impacted?
Yeah. So to your point, yeah, I mean, the higher education, post-secondary, either associate, a community college or a university 4-year degree, those are typically very counter-cyclical, to your point. If the economy tanks, people go back to school to retrain, reskilled, retool, and then eventually as the economy recovers, they'll be better positioned to come back into the labor market. We haven't seen that based on the statistics we track, particularly in Texas. And that's concerning because this is our opportunity as people no longer have a job for them to go back and retrain and retool. So we haven't seen that in Texas. So that's a concern. That's an area we're tracking because that's going to have medium to long-term economic implications. That's going to drive how strong the economy performs in Texas. In El Paso, we have not, to some extent, not seen the same trends as the state level. So when the devil is always in the details. So if you go and look, for example, community college enrollments, there's overall, they have seen a slowdown in growth, but there's specific disciplines that they've seen strong growth. And those are the disciplines that perhaps when it comes to manufacturing are going to play out well. Automotive mechanics, computer, technology-driven sort of disciplines have seen substantial uptick. So hopefully, I mean, if you look at the aggregate number, you might be discouraged, but sometimes when you look into exactly where is people expressing interest, they're expressing interest in some of those sectors that will actually pay quite a bit of dividends regionally. So it's still early to tell, but yeah, no doubt we wanna retool, we wanna reskill our workforce. This perhaps could be an opportunity for us to do so, and so this is challenging. The other thing too that we're tracking very closely, Emma, is that from an economic inclusion perspective, the last number of years, the U.S. have made substantial progress in closing the gaps. When you think about minorities' participation in the workforce, income levels, wage levels, standards of living, we were doing this. The pandemic hit and we're all of a sudden doing this again. And so that's something we're tracking. There's a specific segment of the population that has been hit disproportionately, and that is women with children. They are, because they are schooling at home, they have to withdraw from the workforce, go and take care of their families. We understand why, but that's going to continue to do this. And so that's something we're tracking closely. And as a central bank, we want to make sure that not only we have a growing, vibrant economy, but it's an inclusive economy. And so we're having a lot of conversations with community leaders, business leaders to see what can we do to, once again, begin to do that. So that's something we're tracking, in the space of the workforce development and the economic inclusion that you alluded to.
And we have time for one quick question that you'll have to answer quickly, but it's a good one. How will greater use of robotics on assembly lines impact the region and the supply chain from Ciudad Juárez and El Paso?
It's going to be changed, has been changed, and we'll have to adapt. It's going to come with benefits and cost, but I think what we've seen in other economies, it's the evolution in the right direction, but it's not without pain.
Absolutely. Well, great. Yeah. Thank you so much. When we are out of time, Dr. Coronado, we really appreciate you coming here today to share such valuable data and insights. As the world economy undergoes near constant disruption and change, your research and analysis are more critical now than ever. And we appreciate all the work that you do in our community, as well as your partnership with Paso-Juarez. Once again, I want to thank our sponsors, RexMed, Ingenio RX, and the City of El Paso. But I also want to send a special thanks to our Paso-Juarez team for putting this amazing event together, in particular, Jackie Butler, Cecilia Varela, and Christian Botello, and also to the team at New Discovery Media who helped produce this event. Much appreciation goes out to all of you. And as a quick reminder, this presentation will be available on demand later today and accessible for at least 1 month on this platform. Please take a few minutes now to visit the trade show and visit with our great exhibitors before our next panel session that begins at 10:30 a.m. That will be on creating a regional approach to dealing with medical device manufacturing skills gaps. All right, well, thank you very much to you all. Wishing you a healthy and happy holiday season. Thanks again, and everyone take care.
Thank you, Emma.
Bye-bye.